I was at a conference where they were talking about this idea that I think we're all familiar with, this concept of the sacred secular divide. If you're a pastor or you're a missionary, you're super spiritual and you're really serving God and building his kingdom. If you go to work every day, that's great because you can write a check to support those pastors and those missionaries. And I really came to a crystal clear understanding of the fact that business is ministry. Everything in life was under God's sovereign rule and reign, and that's a place for ministry.
Welcome to the Be Unbound podcast. I'm your co-host, Jonathan Brush, and with me is the still sick but still hanging in there.
I'm your co-host, David Rethemeyer, who has a voice who's an octave lower than usual, but I'm surviving off of prayers and Dayquil. So here to continue to bring you podcast content as always.
And we are so appreciative of that. We have a fantastic conversation come up with Joe. And we should just point out that, first of all, Joe's really passionate about his subject and he's very articulate about it. Also, we just give a shout out to our really hardworking editor because we had massive technical difficulties, I think stemming from the platform that we record these on, that required Joe to really stick with it to get all of his stuff done as he got getting kicked out every 3 or 4 minutes. And that means that our editor had to work really hard to put it all together. And so just worth, there's always people behind the scenes that aren't in front of the mics, that don't have the camera on them, that actually make the things work. And our hardworking editor, Kyle, is one of those. And he had to work especially hard for this episode, and he deserves public recognition. So, Kyle, keep this part in when you're editing this. And thank you so much for your really hard work, and especially on this episode. But it's a delight to introduce you to Joe Denner. As we'll talk about in the introduction, Joe has tons of professional experience, tons of personal experience, but he has a perspective on business that I think is really, really helpful and honestly really exciting. So please enjoy our conversation that we're going to start here with Joe. Joe, welcome to the Be Unbound podcast. I'm delighted to have you here. For the audience, I know Joe through some retreats that we attend together. And through that process, which has now gone on to several years, I've been able to do two things. I've been able to witness a little bit from afar, so I get some perspective on Joe and his business, his life, and all those things, while also really having some conversations and hearing what he's struggling with and succeeding at and working with. And in the process, two things have happened. One, just an absolutely colossal respect for Joe Denner and things that he does, and an appreciation for the perspective he has on business and ministry and life and culture. And then also just a real inspiration for the way Joe parents his family and his children and loves his wife. And so that has been really inspirational to me as well. So I get the really cool position today of being able to interview somebody who truly has been a mentor to me. And Joe definitely has some real credibility in lots of areas, but I think probably the most important one is he has 9 children, which is really cool, and 8 grandchildren and 2 on the way,
Yes.
which I think is just absolutely awesome, totally brag-worthy. And there's actually lots and lots of professional things we could say. Joe has been pastor, is currently a business consultant and leader in so many different ways. But honestly, 9 kids, 8 grandchildren, 2 on the way is the part that I think I would want on my Hall of Fame.
Yes,
So, Joe, welcome
I
to the
agree.
Be Unbound podcast.
Hey, it's
Glad to
great,
have you here.
great to be with you, Jonathan. I really appreciate it. And I have, not to just scratch your back here, but I think we've gained a mutual respect over the years. I've enjoyed those hours we've spent late at night talking and wrestling through real life issues, both that have to do with our own families and our lives, but the world and a lot of things. And so I'm super excited because I really appreciate what you and the folks at Unbound are doing. And so I'm really excited to be a part of this. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, Joe, give us a little bit of a quick bio, as much as you'd like to share about where you came from and how you got to what you're doing now. And I think then from there, we can step off because I've got a couple of specific questions I want to ask you about some of the
Sure.
things that we've talked about over the years that I think is relevant to our conversation.
Okay. So I've pretty much grown up in the Midwest, been all the way from Minnesota down to Oklahoma, but been in the Chicagoland area since 1984. I got saved in college at the University of Illinois. That's where I met Christ. That's where I met my wife. And things have taken off since then. We were part of a house church for 13 years. And that's really where I got into my kind of pastoral side of things, loving to preach and teach God's word. But I graduated from U of I and went right into a job with Deloitte and Touche, which was at that time, one of the big 6 public accounting firms. Spent about a year there. So the first 15 years of my career was really in accounting and finance. Became a CFO for a small company and just had a blast doing that, but ultimately got into operations. And once I got into the operational side of the business and became the chief operating officer, man, that's where I fell in love with people and people management and leader development and what is leadership versus management. And that's where I got really excited. And ultimately, God led us in 2006 was when the seed got planted. Was at a homeschool conference, and God began to speak to me and my wife about me starting my own business. Honestly, I had no clue what I would do. I really did not want to be an accounting person at that time anymore, at least in kind of a consulting type of a role, or I hated taxes. So I wanted nothing to do with taxes. So discovered this whole area of professional coaching, quite honestly, and took my first class and knew it was what God called me to do, knew it was what He made me to do. And I've been doing that, both executive coaching and business consulting and strategy development for the last 16 plus years. Get the absolute privilege of working with some amazing leaders. My primary niche is in small businesses. So I'm working with guys that are doing anywhere from $500,000 a year up to $100 million a year. And that's really my sweet spot. I've done some client work outside of that with Honeywell and State Farm and such, but my real niche is small businesses. And I just love helping these leaders grow and become all of who God's made them to be. We've moved around a bit. I did do a bivocational role as a pastor. After I had started my business, I pastored a church for about almost 9 years. And then as the business was growing, the church was growing, God made it really clear through an abundance of godly counsel that I needed to really focus on this business and really make that the full-time calling of my life. It really is a ministry. It's a ministry to business leaders. And so that's just a little bit about me. But as you said, 9 kids. I love being a dad, love being a husband, and certainly love being a grandpa. That's been a ton of fun. And all my grandkids live more than 9 hours away, which is a bit of a bummer, but all in God's perfect timing and plan. But I just got to spend 2 weeks with 4 of my grandkids who came to see us,
Awesome.
and that was an absolute blast. So that's a little bit about me and the amazing story God has been bringing about in my life, and I'm just honored and privileged to serve Him and the people that He's allowed me to play a part in their lives.
Well, Joe, we could probably do a series of podcasts on leadership, on coaching, on parenting, on all those kinds of things. And I've got,
Yeah,
50 questions I could probably ask. And maybe we should do that. We were talking earlier. If you're listening
that'd
to
be
this
fun.
podcast, you heard us do a podcast with Matthew McDill. And we were joking that the three of us know each other, and we were joking that we should do one together. And actually,
Oh yeah,
it's not a joke. We should absolutely do that. So we'll perhaps
absolutely.
follow up with that. But Joe, you and I have an opinion that has turned out to be surprisingly controversial. I think it
Mm,
surprised both of us a little bit. And so let me frame it up a little bit and then let you kind of take it away. So if you go to the Be Unbound website and you can look there and find our statements of belief and what our priorities are, we actually send this to every one of our employees as they come on. And
mm,
so we lay it out this way. And I, I'm a little bit have an eye roll reaction to mission statements and purpose statements and all those kinds of things. It's not that I don't think that they matter. I just think that a lot of people do it just so they can hang it on the wall. They don't
yeah,
really pay attention to it.
yeah, I
So
agree.
as a way to kind of make it more powerful, I said, let's do a set of priorities. Also, because I don't have the capability of writing something as short as a mission statement, which anybody, including David, who works with me, knows. And so that was the actual excuse. But so I said, let's do some priorities. And so our priority number one as a company is to build the kingdom of Christ. And so
Amen.
that's what we want to do above everything else. And then the second priority, and this is the part that's controversial, is that we will do that primarily through taking care of our own people. And
Yeah,
then our third priority is we'll take care of our customers and students. Now, we will need to take care of our customers and students in order to take care of our people. So those things are
yeah,
absolutely linked and we can't pull them apart. But the people that we spend the most time with and we invest the most time together is going to be the people on our team. And so we
yes,
have to prioritize taking care of them. And of course, to do that, we have to take care of our students. And so I see, what I do at Unbound as very much both mission and ministry and vocational work and all those kinds of things, really
yeah,
centered in taking care of our team. And then by extension, what we do to create value for our clients and students and customers and all those kinds of things. So
amen.
this kind of business is mission. Now, you're even more articulate about that than I am, and you also have some really focused thinking about that. But I think we've both been surprised when occasionally we say, "Hey, being a business owner has as much ministry potential in some ways as the set apart ministry." We're not saying one's better than the other. We're just saying that there's ministry there. And I think we've both been surprised when people sort of push back on that. So talk to me a little bit about your convictions in that area and how you came to them.
Yeah, I think a big part of that happened for me about 7 or 8 years ago. At least it became crystal clear to me. I was at a conference where they were talking about this idea that I think we're all familiar with, this concept of the sacred secular divide. That, if you're a pastor or you're a missionary, you're super spiritual and you're really serving God and building his kingdom. If you go to work every day, that's great because you can write a check to support those pastors and those missionaries. And I really came to a clear understanding, a crystal clear understanding of the fact that business is ministry. And so I've come to the place where I really don't like the term full-time ministry, because the implication is that I'm doing some kind of pastoral or missionary type work, or I'm working for a parachurch organization and I'm in full-time ministry. And I haven't really gotten to the place where I try to become kind of confrontational with people, but I want to say, oh, great, so am I. And then when they ask me what I do, I'll say, yeah, I'm a business owner. And that, their head's going to cock and be like, I'm not really sure what you're talking about. And it's because people have this idea that our work in the secular world isn't sacred. And the problem is, if you go back to the Old Testament, the idea of secular, not only there was not a word for secular in the Hebrew language, there was not a concept of of secular in the Hebrew language, because as far as they were concerned, it all belonged to God. Everything in life was under God's sovereign rule and reign, and that everything that he made us to do and created us to do, and where he positioned us in his providential, sovereign wisdom, was the place where we were to live in that place of submission to God. And that's a place for ministry. So that's what really solidified it for me. And I think that most people don't agree with it simply because they've never heard of that before. So the controversy comes more from, that's a that's a weird concept. It doesn't make sense to them, as opposed to, let's talk about this and I could actually come to that conclusion. It's more of that initial reaction that I think creates the quote unquote controversy.
Yeah, I had a really interesting conversation several years ago. I was working for a company and we were doing a lot of work for Chick-fil-A.
Hmm.
And so I was actually running that account. And so I was talking to a lot of operators and going to all the Chick-fil-A events, which are pretty interesting. If you ever get an opportunity to do so, going to the Chick-fil-A National Conference is quite the deal. I felt like I was the only one in the building who wasn't being given a new car, because at that time it was like, if you made a 30% increase in sales in your franchise, you got a new car. And basically, if you had a Chick-fil-A sign on the door, you were increasing 30% at that time.
Yeah,
And so
exactly.
literally it looked like a car conference, because there was every major manufacturer was there, because they were trying to convince the operators to choose their
Mm.
car. So anyhow, it's just kind of a wild thing. But I met this guy there who has a really fascinating story. He was an Army Ranger, and then he came back from that and had a really interesting career, not a full career, but a time in the Army, and then was really on fire for reaching young people. And so he was a youth pastor, and he kind of ran into the youth pastor problem, right? Which, he gets them for an hour on Sunday and maybe an hour
Yeah.
during the week and all those kinds of things. And so he was looking around for ways to have a bigger impact on students. And his conclusion was to have a Chick-fil-A franchise. And he said, "Look," he said, "my
Wow.
opportunity for discipleship is colossal now." He said, "I've got an
Yeah.
enormous team of young people, and I get them multiple hours a day, and I get to disciple them every single day in how to live
Yes.
their life and how to take care of their finances and how to treat other people." And he said, "I'm having, you know, an exponentially bigger impact on these
Mm.
students as their boss, as the operator of this
Yeah.
Chick-fil-A franchise, than I ever did as a youth pastor." And that was one of those kind of, like, you say it and you're kind of like, "Oh, what did you just say?" And then it's like, well, that really makes sense in some deep ways. And so that's always stuck with me. So talk to me a little bit about, you obviously had this opportunity of working with multiple businesses. So you've worked with one, you've been the CFO of a business, but now as a coach and a consultant, you do that across a wide range. So maybe put some flesh on these bones and tell us,
Hmm.
give us some examples of how you see that kind of ministry being lived out in some of the businesses that you work with or have observed, either directly or indirectly
Yeah.
as you've, been paying attention to this?
Yeah, no, that's a great story, and I love that, and I wanna be really clear too, Jonathan. This is not to diminish the roles of pastors or
Sure.
diminish the roles of missionaries. I wanna be super clear about that. I have a great appreciation for those who submit to God in whatever way that calling comes. But in the business world, I heard a great line years ago that I used recently at a men's conference, and that was, people don't have to go to church, but they do have to go to work. And so that idea that you just mentioned, where this guy gets these people, 8 hours, sometimes in some people's roles, 10, 12 hours a day, you have an enormous opportunity to, and I believe that discipleship is primarily lived out life on life. And so this 1 hour thing of whether it's youth ministry or I've got 1 hour in the pulpit, or maybe in some pulpits, I've got 20 minutes. We've got these micro opportunities in many ministries to impact people. But at work, man, it's because then they see me live my life. They see me live out my life. And I really believe that is the number one key is how are people living out their lives? But it's an opportunity at work. And this is what I recommend. And this is what I've seen in places is managers really taking this idea of a shoulder to shoulder, face to face kind of mentality and working with their people. Way too many leaders are stuck in their offices. And I can certainly, as a task oriented guy, I could be one of those guys. And so what we have to do is we have to force ourselves to get out into the world. And we also, I think sorry, I could go so many different directions with this, but I think the one key area that I've seen this lived out most effectively is in what we like to call one-on-ones. And I saw this firsthand. I had a place down in Texas, in Lubbock, Texas, at a company that has hundreds of employees, and every single manager meets one on one with every one of their direct reports for 1 hour every single week. And you might think, man, that's crazy. Well, they've even structured their company so that no manager has more than 6 people reporting to them. And you go, how do you do that and afford that? And their philosophy is this: some companies write checks to mission organizations, some companies write checks to fund a missionary business or a ministry within the own four walls of their business. So they're actually spending money that they might give outside of their organization to support some other organization, and they're spending that on management level people who can engage one on one with their people. And in that one on one, the focus is on getting to know one another. The focus can be on business, but primarily those managers are trained and encouraged to get to know their people and to spend time getting to know their people. And here's an amazing anecdotal piece of evidence. I was at that company years ago. They were putting on a conference. There was a radio station there. The radio station said, yeah, we hear all this stuff you're talking about, but we'd like to talk to your people. Like, these are all your leaders. We want to talk to your folks. Well, they said, carte blanche, go talk to anybody you want. They interviewed, I think, more than 10 or 15 people. And almost every person was asked this question: what do you love about your job? Why do you love working here? 90% of the employees said, my favorite part about working at this company is my one on one with my manager. Like, that blew my mind. And it's because, bottom line, Jonathan, people want to be known and they want to know. People want to be known by other people and they want to know other people. And so where I see that lived out best is in these one-on-ones that managers and teams have, of spending intentional, scheduled, consistent, disciplined time just hanging out with their employees and getting to know them. That's probably the number one way that I've seen it. But there's lots of other ways, whether it's having a Bible study or whether it's just having the kind of, and here's the other thing I would say really key that I teach more than anything is building strong relationships with your team members, making sure that that is an intentional investment of your time and energy. And whether you do it through one-on-ones, whether you do it by sitting at their desk with them, whether you do it by getting in a truck and taking a kind of ride along with somebody, doesn't really matter how you do it, but live with them where they live, work with them where they work, and understand their world, get to know them, build strong relationships with them where they know you know them You've got their back. You trust them. They trust you. I think those are some of the keys.
Yeah, I think that's excellent. I think that that's excellent both in terms of perspective and also sort of nuts and bolts and how we do it. You made a really good observation at the beginning of that, which is we don't want in any way to demean pastors. And so I might just echo that and say the same thing. And we just had Matthew on here recently, who has a lot of pastoral
Yeah.
experience and background. So we
Right.
talked about that. I liken it sort of to this. We would say that we place a high emphasis on teachers in our society or professors at colleges or things like that. And so those are really important positions, and we understand they're pivotal positions and they're really important to people's future development. And that's exactly the point. It's their future development. It's that those people are preparing them to go out. And so,
Yeah.
to my mind, a pastor in many places is to train folks to go out and actually do the ministry. Many pastors don't have opportunity to do ministry themselves. They're training their team to go out and do
Yeah.
that. And so the place that takes place is in the workplace. And so I think that you hit on something that's obviously really powerful, this idea that people want to be seen and known and that there's a relationship. But I think that
Mhm.
that's I think there's two ends to that that's kind of interesting. On one end, you have people that think that is not what I think of as work at all. Like I don't necessarily have to work with my best friends, right? Which is maybe a little bit of a defeatist attitude. I don't think that's possible.
Yeah.
Then there's the other end where we've got a lot of young people who think that they will get all of their identity at work.
Yeah.
And I think based on what you just said in our previous conversations, that's neither of those is quite the right answer here. We're not talking about deriving all of your identity from work, but we're talking about a genuine place where people are seen as people instead
Yes.
of as tools or pieces of machinery or things like that. So could you speak to that a little bit? Where it's we don't have this kind of Gen Z idea that my career, my work is my entire identity, and yet we're rejecting this kind of maybe previous generation idea, which is where work is to be survived. And there's
Yeah.
something, it's not in the middle. There's something different here where
I
work is a
agree.
place where you're seen. Yeah. So talk a little bit about that, Joe.
Yeah, I think it really comes down to the fact that when I talk about building strong relationships with people, that is an inclusive idea. It means in their work, it means in their home life, it means getting to know their hopes and their dreams and their passions, even if that means that their hopes and dreams take them beyond the four walls of my organization. Some of the best organizations I've seen have zero problem investing in people and growing people and having them leave and go somewhere else. And in some ways, if you think about it as almost from a pastoral standpoint, it's almost like going as a missionary to a foreign country, training the people up to where now that country is now sending missionaries out to other nations. And it's not like, oh, no, no, don't leave. We want to build the church here. No, it's like, no, 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 go, go, go. And so the bottom line is, I want to get to know them and I want to teach and train and mentor and disciple them as a whole person. And so now it's not just about work. But here's the other thing, it's not about work either. It has everything to do with work and it has everything to do with my life. And so when you feel known, not as just a worker, but as a person, and you feel known not only as a person, but as a worker and the value that you bring, I'm trying to teach and mentor people to see themselves as my job is what I do. It is not who I am. And by getting to know them as a whole person, I think we move beyond that. But the fact that I'm in there shoulder to shoulder with them, sitting at their desk, going on ride alongs with them, I'm also showing them that their work is important, that their work is valuable. And by the way, if they're a believer, I want to be planting that seed into them too, that you know what, God has you here. This is your ministry field, your mission field. And so that's kind of how I look at it, is that as I treat them, walk with them and live with them as a whole person, then I don't think we waver to either end of that pendulum swing.
Well, I think that treating them as a whole person, David would know this. I absolutely despise, and I'm talking about like top level despising here, the term human resources. So I
Hmm.
refuse to. We are not allowed in Unbound to use the term HR. When I say it, we actually we have TNT because it blows things up. It's teams and training. Is that
Okay.
is our
He's
I like
equivalent
made
that.
to HR?
entirely too happy by the fact that that is an official department in our company for reference.
Yeah,
The
that's
TNT
great.
department. But I had a really recent example of this. I have a close friend whose wife has some physical ailments, and she's actually an excellent worker. And she's in and I don't want to get too specific, but she's in a profession where she is a top level professional in terms of training and all those kinds of things. And so she had this recent situation where, because of her physical ailment, she fell and she was having trouble getting up. And nobody in the building would actually assist her because HR had advised that it would be a legal liability. And so
Oh
she
my
literally had
goodness.
to call her husband and her mother-in-law to come to her place of work and assist her to and I just heard that. And now obviously this is a bit of an extreme example, but I
Yeah.
thought, wow, isn't that kind of the picture perfect thing of this idea that our people are merely tools? You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like, can you imagine a better way to say you're only as good as what I can get out of you, and I'm not gonna risk anything to take care of you. And at the same time, my younger, well, now my middle son, since we have a young foster son
Yeah.
now, is as an EMT, and he was in a convenience store that if you live in our area, you'd probably know very well. And a person came up to him to congratulate him on or to thank him for being an EMT. And he went to shake his hand and he grabbed his arm and he started to shake and then he collapsed and he actually had a seizure right at that moment when he came to talk to my son. And
Whoa.
so my son, kind of carried him down to the ground and he's immediately, and he has a funny story. He says, my first thought was, and he had just become an EMT, and he says, my first thought was somebody should call 911. And my second thought was, oh, shoot, I am 911.
Yeah, right.
So,
That's
and he was wearing his
hysterical.
uniform. They had actually
Yeah.
walked over from the rescue squad building. And so he called and he said that the employees of the store completely disregarded this drama playing out in front of them. They kept checking out customers, they kept answering the phone, they kept doing their work, they kept preparing food. And so he had the other folks in his squad with him, and so he ended up being ironically the senior person in the situation. And so he sent them to get some supplies from the best rescue squad ability to take care of him. And so he's pretty fired up about it. And so he said afterwards, and this particular chain has actually trained their employees and told them that if there's a medical emergency that they may call 911, but they may not get involved in the other way because it's a liability. And it's
Gosh.
to me, there's two things there. There's something outrageous about that, but there's also this
Yes.
incredible opportunity, Joe. So
Mm.
I look at that. There's a negative side you get really fired up
Yeah.
about it, but there's this
Yeah.
positive side where you go, if you're the kind of employer who just treats your people like humans, let alone if you go to the level that you're talking about here, you're talking about a brand new culture and you're talking about a brand new, let me just say that my friend's wife is not necessarily feeling super loyal to her company right now.
Y
And I'm not
yeah.
feeling super interested in patronizing this chain that my son was talking about in the future. So I think that there's an aspect there, but as you've worked with clients, what has this done to the culture?
Where this kind of culture is being built, employees are engaged. They are more in tune with what's going on. They're more what I call mentally and emotionally invested in the business. And I think that's because they know that they're being invested in by the people around them. And I think the other evidence is the opposite side of this. I'm seeing companies and working with companies where there is not the sense of this, and you just don't have the same level of engagement. You don't have the same level of buy-in and the same level of energy and innovation. And there's a lot of things that come from people who believe that they are known and that they are valued and that they are welcome. So I think those are the evidences that I see in the places that are doing this really well.
So talk a little bit about what happens downstream of that, because I think that there's that aspect, which I think I 100% agree with. But so it's like, okay, now I know they care about me. And so because they care about me, I'm invested in all this. But I think that what is interesting is that in companies that care about their people, a couple interesting side effects start to happen. You tend to trust your people more and
Mhm.
you tend to release your people a bit more. And so
Yeah.
talk about what you see kind of on the down end side in terms of like, innovation or creativity or even just a management aspect to this in companies where that if you know that your employer cares for you, it's not just that you're like, oh, I like them, but I think it impacts the way you work as well, right?
Sure. Yeah, there's studies out there, and I don't have them at my fingertips here, but there are studies out there that show that high trust environments are the most highly innovative environments. And I would say high trust environments are also the most high growth environments, both personally, professionally, organizationally. And it's because all of this creative energy is getting released. Because when you don't feel trusted and you don't feel valued, even if it's subconscious, you just don't bring your A game every day. Because as I said earlier, you're just not as mentally and as emotionally invested. And so some of the downstream things are just literally growth, like people growing, people learning, people getting promoted. I would say this one client that I referred to earlier that has really been living this even before they discovered some of the guts of this idea and topic. They've got people that are growing in their organization. They've grown their leadership team from 3 to 7 people in the last 3 years. And I think that a lot of it has to do with some of the cultural changes that took place over the last 6 years. So you're seeing people grow personally, seeing people grow professionally. But that idea of being released, I think, happens internally and externally because people are getting released sometimes to do greater work where they are, but sometimes they're leaving and they're going to different organizations and they're doing even greater things and taking their game to a whole new level. And so I think that's another big part of this is I think that the companies that are doing this really, really well are not holding on to their people. They are investing into their people open-handedly, and then those people know that it's not just, I mean, they know that the company's benefiting from the investments that they're making into them, but they also know that it goes beyond that because they know it's about them in person, not just about the organization. So I think innovation, growth, just energy, enthusiasm, a sense of team. I mean, I think all those kinds of things are happening in these kinds of cultures.
Well, and what this reminds me of is this was a concept that I learned when I was in grad school getting my MBA was it's a theory called McGregor's theory X and theory Y of motivation. And basically it's a leadership theory where theory X, which has been sort of the traditional model over a long time, is that people intrinsically don't enjoy work and they have to be motivated and pushed to actually do work and do their jobs. Whereas theory Y is that when people actually have a good mindset going into their work, they can actually enjoy their work and they can
Yes.
want to go to work and do it themselves and they can actually be motivated to work. And I think a lot of what you're saying is that you're pushing into that theory Y of saying like, people can actually really want to and enjoy their work and be active participants in it
Yeah.
if you treat them as people and not as resources.
Yeah. And I think there are people out there who don't want to work, but I think the vast majority of people want to work. They want to do well. And so, yes, it's absolutely leaning into that. And it's
Mhm.
just really, and here's the other thing. I get this question all the time from people I'm doing management training with, and that is, how do I motivate my people? And I say, you know what?
Mm.
Honestly, I don't think it's your job to motivate people. I think it's your job to create a culture and an environment within which people can motivate themselves, get engaged, and
Mhm.
see the fruit of that engagement. Because a lot of people will come in guns blazing and they just get shut down or they become anonymous. And all of a sudden that energy just begins to leak out and seep out. But if you as the leader are creating a culture and an environment where people can thrive and flourish, I think most people will plant themselves and most people will dig in and set roots. David, I think you're right. And I think there's a couple things going on. Number one, yes, I do think that people see the value of what they're doing. And I think that I like to call it sacred work. I like people to understand that all work is sacred. I don't care if you're a plumber, I don't care if you're a line worker, I don't care if you're working in a hotel. As long as your work's not sin, your work is sacred. And even unbelievers, I think, can pick up on that in the way that we value what they do. But interestingly, David, where I thought you were going with that is something that I think is also true. And that is that when this culture really takes root and they see that I see them as a person, all of a sudden they begin to see me as a person. And it's like this two-way thing that's going on. It's like we're two human beings here. And there's a great book that I want to recommend called Leadership and Self-Deception. It's by the Arbinger Institute. And in that book, they talk about not seeing people as objects, but as human beings. And I think what's really critical is that that becomes a two-way thing. And as we model that and as we live that out with them, I think the power of that gets unleashed. And so when I see them as a person and they begin seeing me as a person, all of a sudden now we start seeing all the people around us as people. And now it takes on a whole new life and a whole new set of energy. And it's a whole different world because people aren't used to living and working and operating in that kind of a world. And it just creates a whole new, you know, set of expectations and set of rewards and all this amazing stuff that comes along with it. It's amazing stuff when it really takes root.
Well, Joe, I appreciate your thoughts and your perspective on this. I get super excited every time I hear you talk about this. I get super excited about thinking about the potential here. And this is not, this is not a lessening of any kind of other ministry. It's really the realization, and I think the way you best said it was that there is no divide between the secular and the sacred. That all of this world is God's, and that means that all this world has opportunity for ministry, and that every person we run into is made in the image of God. And so,
Yeah.
if you're dealing with people, you're in a ministry situation. And
Yes.
so I really appreciate your perspective, your wisdom, your, talking about this and sharing this. And I'm excited about the fact that you're working with clients that you're teaching this to. I think ultimately it makes the world a much better place to live in. So thanks for your time and thanks
Yeah.
for your expertise. I want to do this again sometime soon.
Yeah. I would love to do it again. And I'm just grateful that God has put this in my heart, has exposed me to this, and is giving me the opportunity to engage with business leaders in bringing this about because it's for His glory. It brings His kingdom into the marketplace, and there's a lot of fruit when that happens.
Amen. Well, despite technical difficulties, we did survive. And honestly, we probably would have gone a lot longer if we didn't have the technical problems. And so we'll
Mm.
have to have, I'm serious about the fact that we should have Joe back. I think there was 4 or 5 different places I wanted to go with that. But one of the thoughts that I didn't say in the conversation just because we were having our technical problems is that in some ways, I think the heart of what Joe says is this idea, and he mentioned it several times, that good companies that build good cultures aren't afraid to let their people go. And I think that's an interesting, somewhat counterintuitive idea, but it is really an important one. And I think there's an interesting parallel here. If you were part of a church that didn't let you leave, there's a different name for that. And it's not church.
Mhm.
And that's not a healthy environment. Most people recognize that if you're in a church that is set up in such a way that they expect you to, not expect you to leave, but they are delighted to send you out to do ministry some other place at the proper time. And that doesn't mean that everybody's leaving or they're trying to kick people out, but it means that, when it comes time in life that you're shifting or moving or you're relocating or you have other opportunities, that they send you with their blessing. Most people say, well, that's a pretty good church. And I think that's an interesting parallel for a company. If you have a company that trusts you enough to let you go and thinks long term in the fact that that's just more connections for us down the road, there's a lot of healthy culture there in different ways. And we actually talked with Joe a little bit after we stopped the recording that I have a friend who's involved with a company that wasn't like that and actually made his life quite miserable when he left. And I think that ultimately that may seem functionally important to the company at the time. It really crushes some long-term culture and I think bites you in the long term, not to mention the fact that just who wants to work for people like that? So.
Yeah, yeah. Funny enough, I see a lot of memes on the internet about how so many companies will talk about just, oh, we have such a great company culture, here we're family. And I see a lot of the memes saying just like, well, it is family because once you get in, they really want to keep you around and just abuse the relationship and they're very manipulative. And so what an actual good company culture is should just be like a really good, like a loosely held friendship, which is like, hey, we're delighted to have you while you are here, and we want to like invest in you and have you invest in us and have this be a mutually beneficial relationship for as long as you're here. And that's if you can find a place like that, that's a great place to be.
I think it's true. I might go a step further and talk about a functional family, right? In a
Mm,
functional family, you are very much in the family and you're very much a part of everything. And then families that function correctly, you eventually move out. You start your own family
mhm.
and your own thing. And sometimes you're still really close with those people and with your family. And sometimes you only see them for Thanksgiving and Christmas because you've had to move farther away and you contact them other times. I think in the best situations, if you can hire employees that are all in while they're there, And then some of those employees will remain close to you even after they leave because you're in parallel industries or companies or things like that. They might work as contractors. And some of them you might not see. And yet when you do see them, there's an instant connection because they left on good terms and you're excited to see their continuing ongoing success. I think that's a good mark of good company culture. It's a good
Mhm.
challenge for us at Unbound to keep up. And it's maybe something for the rest of you to think about, both in terms of if you are the people in charge of your company's culture or if you're looking for company cultures to join. Well, speaking of culture, I think that there are many things we can claim, and we try to claim only the ones that we're sure about. But we just recently had an Ascend webinar. Our Ascend program has webinars every month. And during that Ascend webinar, our guest asked our students what the best part of Ascend was. And the entire room just blew up, and the answers were almost entirely the same. It was the friends, it was a community, friends, community, friends, community, friends, community, almost the whole way down. And so, whatever else we have at Unbound, we have an absolutely amazing culture and a culture where people like to be together. And yes, a culture that launches students. We don't keep them forever and we send them out. And yet, we get to maintain relationships with them. Some of them we maintain really close relationships with. Some of them, like David, come and work for us. And some of them we are close to and we catch up to, and some we don't see for years. And when we do, it's like reuniting with old friends. And so, if that kind of a culture appeals to you, then hey, we got a place where you can start. And so check out beunbound.us and you can join that culture as a high school student through our Equip and Declare programs. You can enjoy that. You can join that culture as a post high school student and as a high school student through our Ascend program. And come to our website, check out our YouTube channel, and get a little bit of a glimpse of what that culture looks like. Like I said, we try to make sure that we can only talk about things that we can deliver on. And this is a strange thing to feel so confident in, but I am confident that if you show up to one of our events, you will immediately be able to feel and see that this is a unique culture and one that's pretty healthy and a lot of fun to be part of. Well, with that, we will see if we can keep David upright for our last recording, and we will look forward to seeing you in our next episode. And until then, be unbound.